السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. معكم الأستاذ أسامة من مجموعة الواتن الدولية. اليوم إن شاء الله حنستكمل درسنا في برنامج الأفتر إفكت. نحن أخذنا امبارح درسين أو فيديوهين عن عن الأشياء النظرية اللي كانت أنا بدي أشرح لكم إياها. فيديو عن الألوان، فيديو عن الصوت. اليوم إن شاء الله راح نستكمل الدرس عندنا في الفيديو اللي هو عن الإضاءة. وبالإضافة إذا كان عندنا وقت إضافي راح ناخذ الحركات السينمائية. الحركات السينمائية والإضاءة. هي أول شيء خلينا نتكلم عن الإضاءة. نحن تكلمنا أول شيء عن الصوت، عن الألوان. كيف الألوان إنها ممكن هي تعطي طابع جميل للفيديو، كيف إنها ممكن إنها تغير لك الفيديو 180 درجة. بالنسبة للصوت، الصوت هو نص الفيديو أو نص أو نص صحيح، نص الفيديو اللي أنت عم تشوفه. الصوت هو نص الفيديو. تكلمنا إنه نحن ممكن نخفي المايكات اللي عم نستخدمها بطريقة احترافية. تكلمنا إنه نحن لازم نخلي دقة الصوت عالية، ولو حتى دقة الفيديو كانت قليلة، دقة الصوت أبدا ما لازم تنزل. شفنا كيف نتفلكس لما يكون عندك أنت الإنترنت ضعيف، كيف ممكن هي تنزل لك الكواليتي تبع الفيديو وما تنزل لك الكواليتي تبع الصوت. هي بالنسبة للصوت. وكمان شفنا أسعار المايكات، إذا واحد حابب يشتري كذا مايك كيف أسعارها، كيف المايكات الاحترافية. بالنسبة للإضاءة اللي حناخذها اليوم، أول شيء إضاءة. الإضاءة هي جدا جدا مهمة لتعطي طابع رياحي للفيديو. اليوم كله هذا رح نشوفه سوية. يعني مثلا كيف هلا ما راح اشرحها بدون ما نشوف الفيديو. خلينا نفوت على طول على الفيديو ونقول بسم الله. بعدين نحن نشرح هو الفيديو أو هو الفيديو يعني عم يشتغل. أي. تمام، هذا هو الفيديو. خلينا نسوي شير سكرين ونبلش. في صوت على ما أعتقد، صحيح؟ ما في صوت.
I'm the largest online film academy in the world, and today we're talking about cinematic lighting. Now, this
بيقول عن السينماتيك لايتنج، يعني الإضاءة السينمائية.
video is part 2 in our cinematic trip.
نحن طبعا شفنا شو بسموها اللايتنج، هاي لسه ما أعتقد شفناها. أو اللايتنج هي هلا عم نشوفها. الموفمنت لسه ما شفناها، ولا هذا الفيديو لسه ما شفناه.
Trilogy: cinematic composition, cinematic lighting, and cinematic movement. Now, lighting is not only the most overlooked aspect of filmmaking, but is also the number one thing that will change everything about your
بحكي لك إنه الإضاءة هي الرقم الأول، الرقم واحد لحتى تغير لك أي شيء أنت بدك إياه.
projects. If you can learn lighting, you will up the production value like you have never seen before. And like I said, it's also the most overlooked aspect of filmmaking. I've actually seen filmmakers buy red cameras with no lighting, and their footage looks worse than someone with a T5i with great lighting. When people ask me to critique their work or ask me why their shot doesn't look as good as their competition, I can usually tell immediately that they either didn't have any lights or their lighting is really bad. But in today's lesson, I want to give you the 8 steps that you need to take in order to have cinematic lighting. If you take these 8 steps, I promise you, your image will look 1,000.
بحكي لك رح يعطينا هو ثمان خطوات. إذا احنا اتبعنا ال8 خطوات هدول راح يطلع الفيديو تبعنا جدا جميل. بالنسبة طبعا خطوات بالنسبة لوين؟ خطوات إضائية. يعني إذا أنت اتبعت الخطوات هاي راح شو راح يصير؟ حيطلع الفيديو تبعك بروفيشنال.
1,000 times better, even
شوفوا كيف قبل
if you just
وكيف
have a
هذا
cell phone.
بعد.
Your image
شوفوا كيف الفيديو هون نايم، ما فيه أي
will
إضاءة، ما
look
فيه
a
أي حركة.
thousand times
شوف
better,
بعد ما حط هذا كله إضاءة، ها، هذا أبدا ما غيرنا بشيء غير إنه أضفنا إضاءات.
even if you just have a cell phone. And to show you just how easy it is to get great lighting, I personally own many aperture lights and I use them for every single project. And in my opinion, aperture lights are some of the absolute best that you can buy. But for this entire episode, everything that you are seeing has been shot with cheap lights that anyone can buy. I'm using the Godox SL-150, which is about $240, and the Godox SL-60 watt, which is only about $150. So I want to take a cheaper light and show you guys that you don't need crazy expensive lights to get cinematic lighting. All you have to do is follow these 8 steps and you will be shocked at the difference. Starting off with step number 1, and is actually one of the most important and also doesn't require any lights, and that is to shoot shadow side. Now there are many different names for this: shooting negative fill side, short side, dark side, whatever you want to call it, but the idea of shooting shadow side is that whatever side your light is placed on, your camera needs to be on the other side of the subject. This might seem like something really simple, but you wouldn't believe the difference it makes, and you also wouldn't believe how many people don't do this. And I challenge you, go choose any movie off your shelf and try to find a shot that isn't on the shadow side of the subject. It's really difficult because almost every shot in a movie is on the shadow side. Now the reason they do this is because it gives a much more dramatic feel to the scene, it adds depth to the person's face, and also adds more of a 3-dimensional element. It doesn't have to be like a really strong contrast where you can barely see the person's face. It could even be really subtle, like this frame. Even though there's a lot of light on our subject, the key light is coming from the other side of the person's face. If we take these 2 images, we can clearly see which one looks more cinematic. It's always going to be the one where there is more shadows on the subject's face. When I first started out, most of my filming was done on the key side, and it didn't look cinematic whatsoever. All of my interviews were done on the key side, and everything that I filmed was done on the same side that the light was on. One major secret that I learned over the years of filming is that if you want that cinematic look in your images and boost the production value of your films, simply move the camera to the other side of the light. With an interview, put the light on the other side. If it's a really simple shot and someone's literally writing on a calendar, step to the other side of the person's face. If you don't have any lights, just put the light source on the other side of the person's face, even if it's just the sun. You aren't going for like a silhouette look, just a cinematic look. Such a simple step can make such a difference in your production value. Step number 2 is lighting direction. The entire emotion of your project can change just by slightly moving the light in your scene. If you move the light too far up above your subject, you get more dark shadows underneath the eyes, and the person looks less trustworthy and more depressed. If you put the light too low, you will reverse the shadows on the face and the person will start to look like a villain. To get the most natural looking light on a person's face, you want to have the light at a 45-degree angle on their face, creating an upside down triangle on the subject's opposite cheek. This is known as Rembrandt lighting, named after the famous painter Rembrandt, who used this in almost all of his portraits. This lighting will keep those shadows on the face, but also give enough lighting on the other side to illuminate the eye and slight cheek definition. You'll also create a slight drop shadow under the chin, and it just looks natural. If you're setting up your lights, remember that the direction of the light is just as important as anything else. If you place the light at the wrong angle or position, too high, too low, it can result in an amateur image or even confuse your audience as to what they should be feeling. Just a slight movement can make such a difference. Step number 3 is depth. Creating depth and separating your subject from the background is a necessity when filming. You do not want your subject to blend into whatever background they're in. You can create separation by shooting at a lower aperture, bringing your subject away from the background, but you can also add separation by lighting. And one way is with color. Now, like it or not, the orange and teal blockbuster look is very popular because of the color contrast. If the skin tones are very warm and orange, what is the opposite of orange on the color wheel? Blue. And blue complements orange. You see this all the time in movies, and not just in the Transformer movies. But by putting complementing colors in your films to separate your subject, you're not only going to make your film look more cinematic, but you're going to add separation from your subject and the background by having two different complementing colors in the same shot. And again, it doesn't have to be blue and teal, it could be any complementing colors. So if you have a very warm light on your subject's face, instead of putting another warm light in the background, put a complementing color like blue. Find complementing colors to add depth to your image. Another way to separate your subject is to simply have your background darker than your subject. If the background is brighter, it's going to be much harder for the subject to stand out. Simply bring down the exposure of the background to where the subject is brighter than what is behind him. It doesn't have to be super dark or super bright, but the formula that I use is brighter shirt, darker background, darker shirt, brighter background. You just want your subject to stand out from the background by most of the time being brighter than the background, but sometimes even being darker than the background by creating depth. Number 4 is motivated lighting. Nothing screams amateur more than unmotivated light. Now this is light that doesn't come from anywhere and just kind of appears in the scene. Motivated lighting means that in the scene, the lighting is coming from something in the room and the audience knows it. If we show a wide shot and there's no windows or anything around, and then when I cut to a close-up, there's a bunch of light on our subject, it just doesn't make any sense. Motivated lighting means that the audience knows that the source of the light is coming from something natural. If we have a random light on our subject, it just looks unnatural. But if we simply turn on a lamp next to them, it looks like that key light is coming from the lamp, even though in reality, the lamp isn't really putting off much light and wouldn't be able to light up our subject's face like this. But by placing some sort of light source visible to the audience to see, we have created natural, motivated light. In this scene in Bigger Than Life, this harsh underlighting really does make the tension grow in the scene, but why on earth is there a light in the living room pointed up at them? So make sure you have motivated lighting in your scene. It doesn't have to be difficult, and it also doesn't need to put off any light onto your actual subject. It can be as simple as putting a really small lamp in the background. All you want to do is make sure the scene looks natural and that the audience knows where the lighting is coming from. In this scene from Silence, when these characters are having a deep conversation, there's a lot of side lighting on their faces. The only problem is that there is only one giant window in the entire room producing any light, and it's behind them. So how do we show motivated lighting? We have one wide shot showing light coming into the room and hitting the side of the wall over here. Once they show that, the side lighting doesn't seem out of place. Imagine if they didn't show that wide angle shot and it was just a giant window producing light into the room, and then we cut to a close-up and it's side lighting. It would make no sense. So whenever you're lighting a scene, if there isn't a natural reason for a light to be on the face, create one. Next is background lighting. This is something that many people tend to look over because how important it is to light your subject. But if you forget to light your background, your image will not look natural and you run the risk of it looking like a stage play by having all the light on your subject and a completely dark background. And I'm not just talking about interviews. It's important to have some sort of background light for interviews, but in narrative filmmaking as well. Most times this can be achieved simply with just some practical lights. You can add a small lamp to the background if it isn't enough light, maybe add a little bit more light to brighten up a certain area if needed. You can also add some ambient light in the background by either pointing a light into the ceiling, pointing a light into a wall, into a room with lots of diffusion. Just add some sort of life to the background so that it looks natural and doesn't look like the subject was just lit by a stage and they completely forgot about the background. Take any movie or TV show and just imagine how a certain shot would look if there was no light in the background. This shot would be completely black behind our subject if it wasn't for that small light. Same thing with this shot. If it wasn't for those few candles, this shot would look unrealistic and look like it was filmed on a stage somewhere. Adding a few small lights to the background really make a difference. Next is time of day. And for those of you who don't know, the absolute best time of day to shoot is in golden hour. This would be the first hour of light when the sun is coming up and the last hour of light when the sun is going down. If you shoot with the sun directly overhead, no matter what you do, you're going to get an ugly look because the sun is casting harsh shadows under the eyes, and it's the same as putting a light directly above your subject. During golden hour, there is no harsh shadows and the light is much more appealing. Now, these 3 shots were taken at the same day, one at 7 a.m., one at 12 p.m., and the other at 7 p.m. If you were to choose which one looks the best, it would be an easy choice. It would be the first one and the last one. And all I did was shoot at a certain time of day. Personally, during golden hour, I like to put the sun behind my subject and shoot into the sun. This will not only give you a very cinematic look, but will also give you beautiful lens flares. And if you plan accordingly, you can sometimes capture lots of detail in the sky when the sun is starting to go down. Shooting any other time will result in a blown out sky, but choosing to shoot during golden hour will increase the cinematic quality of your films immediately. Next is a catch light, or an eye light. And this is the reflection of the source of light in your subject's eyes. Now, most people don't really think about this, but a catch light or an eye light gives your subject life. It gives them a soul. It makes them feel alive. They even put white spots in the eye of an animated character to make them feel alive. Yet, those older animations that don't have that white spot feel dead and lifeless and like a shark. Some filmmakers have actually used this to communicate life and communicate death. In King Kong, when Kong dies at the top of the Empire State Building, that eye light fades away. Now, this wouldn't happen in real life, but like I said, the eye light is what makes people feel alive. So whenever they remove that, you know as the audience that he's dead. In The Grey, when Liam Neeson finds himself surrounded by wolves, there is no light in his eyes because he's accepting his fate. But when he decides to fight to the death, that eye light comes back. Life in the fight for survival has been given back to him and communicated to the audience by having a reflection in his eye. With all that being said, just make sure that when you're lighting your subject, you can see that eye light. And if you can't, try moving the light around just a little bit to get that slight reflection. And finally, step number 8 is texture. Now, like it or not, fog and haze completely change lighting. One shot might look okay, but adding just a little bit of haze and a little bit of fog, and it looks like you've just purchased thousands of dollars worth of lights and maybe even upgraded your camera. And that's what I love about fog. It's something so simple, yet can completely change your image. And at the same time, nobody is using it. It doesn't make sense. Now, one little trick that I learned with haze that's amazing is that if you're wanting to get fog outside, it's really difficult and it's really expensive. But not if you use an insect fogger. On Amazon, you can buy these foggers that are meant to repel insects. What you're supposed to do is put insect repellent in it and then spray a giant mist on everything to kill a bunch of bugs. Well, instead, if you use mineral oil or fog juice, it turns an insect repellent into an incredible outdoor fog machine. Now, I would never use this indoors because it's just way too powerful, but outside scenes now look incredible with a simple bug repellent. And of course, I'll have all the links to these in the description below. So now that we know the 8 steps, let's take all of these steps and put them together to make one beautiful cinematic shot. Now, here is our scene. We have our subject sitting in a chair playing the cello. And if we add a light to our subject, it looks fine. I mean, it's fine, it's passable, and this is where many filmmakers would actually stop. But let's take these steps and I'll show you the difference. Our first step is shooting shadow side. Now, the light right now is on the key side of our subject's face. So we need to move the light to the other side of his face, which puts us on the shadow side. Number 2 is lighting direction. As you can see, even though we're on the shadow side, it's still pretty frontal lighting. So let's move the light to a 45-degree angle to get that Rembrandt lighting on our subject's face and add more shadows. 3, 4, and 5 is motivated lighting, backlight, and depth. And I placed all of these together because each one is kind of necessary for the other. First, we need to motivate our key light. So let's simply take a lamp and place it on the same side of our subject and on the same side of our key light. Now the key light is motivated by the lamp in the back. This is also lighting up our background a little bit as well and separating our subject. Next is the background. And even though the lamp is helping a little bit, I do want something on the other side. So we're actually gonna turn on the fireplace over here. And even though it isn't really giving off much light at all, it's adding some interesting element to the background. And not only is it an interesting element, but it's also adding some depth by creating a color contrast. But let's add even more color contrast though by motivating some light from the fire. We're gonna add an orange light to the right side of our subject to look like it's coming from the fire. And again, not only is this light motivated by the fire, but it gives us a really great contrast from the LED key light on our subject's face. And continuing with the background, I really don't like this random door here, and I also don't like the dark window. So we're gonna add another light outside of the window shining inward. This brightens up the background, separates our subject, and also adds some cool texture from the blinds to the left side of the frame. And then finally, let's add some haze. And not only does it soften the overall look of the entire image, but look what it does to the window. Amazing. The first image we did doesn't look horrible because our subject is lit well and many filmmakers would probably be satisfied with this. But by taking these 8 steps, you can change an acceptable image into a cinematic image, all by using cheap lights and a $30 fog machine from Amazon. So thanks again for watching. If you'd like to learn every single aspect of filmmaking, be sure to check out our website at tomorrowsfilmmakers.com. We have over 1,000 training videos and over 100 hours of content on every single filmmaking subject that you can imagine. And if you want to go into the production side with weddings, real estate, music videos, commercials, we teach all about that. And if you want to go into more of the narrative side with directing, storyboarding, acting, we teach all of that as well. And like I said at the beginning, we have been successfully selling this course with an $800 price tag for years, but for a limited time, we are offering it to you guys for only $97. And I'm not even joking. Our award-winning $800 online film course is only $97. So thanks again for watching. Be sure to click subscribe because we're going to be posting videos just like this continuously. And if you'd like to learn more, click the link in the description below and learn all the skills that you need to succeed.
Yeni Omo sıvı düşük sıcaklıkta bile kalıntı bırakmaz.
If you put the light too low, you will reverse the shadows on the face and the person will start to look like a villain. To get the most natural looking light on a person's face, you want to have the light at a 45-degree angle on their face, creating an upside down triangle on the subject's opposite cheek. This is known as Rembrandt lighting, named after the famous painter Rembrandt, who used this in almost all of his portraits. This lighting will keep those shadows on the face, but also give enough lighting on the other side to illuminate the eye and slight cheek definition. You'll also create a slight drop shadow under the chin, and it just looks natural. If you're setting up your lights, remember that the direction of the light is just as important as anything else. If you place the light at the wrong angle or position, too high, too low, it can result in an amateur image or even confuse your audience as to what they should be feeling. Just a slight movement can make such a difference. Step number 3 is depth. Creating depth and separating your subject from the background is a necessity when filming. You do not want your subject to blend into whatever background they're in. You can create separation by shooting at a lower aperture, bringing your subject away from the background, but you can also add separation by lighting. And one way is with color. Now, like it or not, the orange and teal blockbuster look is very popular because of the color contrast. If the skin tones are very warm and orange, what is the opposite of orange on the color wheel? Blue. And the great thing is you can do this with any camera that you have, a DSLR, cell phone. Hey guys, Justice here with tomorrowsfilmmakers.com, the largest online film academy in the world, and today we're going to be talking about cinematic composition. Now, composition is a fancy term for what is in the frame and where is it located. And it might sound simple.
هذا الدرس أو هذا الفيديو أهم فيديو، خلينا نركز عليه أكثر.
But a certain frame can be much more appealing to a viewer than others, and also much more cinematic. But in this training, I'm going to give you guys my 8 steps that I take to make sure that I have great composition. And the great thing is, you can do this with any camera that you have, a DSLR, cell phone, or pretty much anything. You don't need to buy some expensive lights or a Ronin S or an expensive lens to get more cinematic images. All you have to do is watch this video and apply these steps to your filmmaking. Now, the first rule that all of you guys need to apply is the rule of thirds. Now, the rule of thirds is a very well-known technique in the filmmaking world that you might be familiar with, but you also might not be using it properly. In a nutshell, it is scientifically proven that our eyes are drawn to these 4 intersecting points of the frame. Not the direct center, but these 4 corners. So by placing our subject on those 4 corners, it looks very much appealing and much more cinematic to the audience. Watch any Hollywood movie and you will notice that the main subjects are almost always on one of these intersecting points. Now, the center of the frame is always reserved for subjects with authority. If your subject is teaching or has more authority, you can put them in the center of the frame. That's why all master classes and other teaching videos, including one like this, are always placed in the middle. It just automatically gives your subject more authority in whatever he's talking about and makes it look like this is the main subject and I need to be listening to this person. Now, if you have a subject looking into the camera but off to one side, it doesn't feel quite as compelling as if they're in the center of the frame. But if your subject is not doing that, always put them on the rule of thirds. For landscapes or horizons, place them on one of the 2 lines going across and you will have an appealing image. The great thing is, pretty much all cameras have a rule of thirds overlay built in, so you can have the rule of thirds on the back of your camera to get great composition with whatever camera you have. Something as simple as placing your subject on the rule of thirds can completely change your image. Number 2 is balance. Inside your frame, you can have one side more heavy than the other, and the audience can actually feel it. Like in interviews, if you have your subject to one side and also a picture frame on the same side as your subject, your image is going to start to feel unbalanced and very heavy to one side. And even if the audience doesn't know what feels wrong, they just know that something feels off. You can either move that picture frame to the other side or just add something to balance out the image, like a lamp. This looks much more balanced and much more cinematic. And when it comes to composition, I try to have something on the other side of my frame to balance out my subject at all times. And it doesn't have to be something huge, and it also doesn't need to be horizontal. It can also be balanced vertically or diagonally, whether it's a building, a statue, even a flower, something in the frame to balance the image, or your shot will start to look really heavy to one side. You can obviously apply this to interviews and talking head videos, but you can also apply this to weddings, real estate, and all other types of videos. It really doesn't matter, just make sure that you have balance in your frame. Number 3 is depth. You can create depth in many different ways, but one way is to shoot with a lower aperture. Not only will it make your image have more depth by blurring out the background, but it will also make it more cinematic and can also remove any distractions from your audience. This shot looks great, but you had no idea that there was something distracting in the background because we removed the distraction by shooting in a lower aperture. By blurring out the background, we create depth and separate our subject from the background. Another simple way to create depth is to simply pull your subject away from the background. It might seem simple, but I've seen many filmmakers film interviews up against a wall, giving your image absolutely no depth and it doesn't look cinematic. If I have to film an interview in a small room, I will inconvenience myself in order to have depth in my image. I'll push myself and the cameras as far in a corner as possible to bring my subject as far away from the background as possible. You can also add something interesting in the foreground to create depth, and by placing something in the foreground, we're able to not only show movement much easier, but it creates depth in our image and allows us to kind of shoot through it. It doesn't have to be anything large like a person or an object. It could be something small like leaves or plants or coming around from behind something as more of a reveal. We have our subject, the foreground, and the background creating depth. Number 4 is leading lines. These are simply natural lines in your composition that lead your audience to your subject. They can be found in everyday objects like hallways, landscapes, bridges, and they simply draw in your audience's attention to your subject. Now, they use leading lines in Hollywood all the time to bring attention to something. In USA's Mr. Robot, in this building, our subject always knows where he needs to go, and we as an audience know where he needs to go by the leading lines throughout the scene. But when our main character gets lost, what happens to those leading lines? They are gone. The character doesn't know where to go, and we as an audience don't know where he needs to go because there are no leading lines leading our eyes to the subject or the direction he should go. Something as simple as lines in the frame can lead our eyes towards a subject or away from the subject. So look for leading lines in your image to draw the attention of the audience. Some are very obvious like staircases or a handrail, but some can be even more subtle, like the top of a picnic table. The tablecloth works great, but removing the tablecloth so we have those lines on the top pointing towards our subject really make a difference. Number 5 is symmetry. As humans, we love order and we love to see something symmetrical. It looks appealing to us and very cinematic. Now, symmetry is everywhere. Windows, stairs, escalators, it is everywhere. Symmetry also doesn't take much effort to get. Looking at a person one way might look fine, but you might be able to just move the camera slightly to frame the shot in a way that's more symmetrical. This shot not only looks very symmetrical because of the building, but even has leading lines straight to our subject. All of this was done by barely moving the camera. So look around and find symmetry. Frame your shot and compose it properly to get the most natural and most cinematic project you've ever made. Number 6 is a dominant subject. If I critique a student's video, one of the main problems I see most often is that there is no dominant subject. You want to use all of these steps we just talked about to draw your audience towards the subject. But if the audience doesn't even know what the subject is, then you've completely failed in what you were trying to do. And having a dominant subject doesn't mean that you can't do a wide-angle shot and have to be close up on their face. It just means that when an audience looks at an image, they need to know exactly where their eyes need to go. They need to know exactly what they're supposed to be looking at. First thing is to fill the frame. Way too often people have empty space that is unnecessary. Now some people will say, oh, it's artistic. No, it's not. It's distracting. You can be artsy and not distracting. Having this as your main subject, but this is in your frame, this is not artsy. This is sloppy. And most of the time, it's just a simple mistake, and they don't fully fill the frame. So please, fill the frame and get rid of all unnecessary dead space. Number 2 is when you fill the frame, fill it with things that aren't distracting. If we have lots of empty dead space, I would frame it so that you remove some of the dead space. But if you needed to actually fill that frame, if we add something really bright or with movement that's going to be distracting, our audience is going to be confused. We have a dominant subject by shooting at a lower aperture, using symmetry and leading lines to bring attention to our subject and removing all dead space in the frame. Number 7 is headroom or leading room. Have you ever heard the filmmaking phrase, hey, give them some breathing room? This is what they mean. First is headroom. This is the space from the top of the frame to the top of your subject's head. In an interview, you typically want to have your subject's eyes about 2/3 from the top of the frame, and this means that you want to have some room above their head. You don't want their head to be all the way at the top of the frame, and on the flip side, you don't want there to be tons of empty space above their head. Now, there isn't a hard and fast rule to this because all interviews are different, and I've had interviews with people with giant hair, and so you have to determine if you want to have all of the hair in the frame or cut off some of the hair, but it's best to keep their eyes on the top line in the rule of thirds. Now, leading room or looking room is the exact same thing, except it's with the direction your subject is looking. Whatever way they are looking, you want to give them looking room. And just like with headroom, having their eyes about 2/3 of the frame, you would want to give your subject about 2/3 of the frame to look into. The basic rule is you want more room in front of your subject than behind them. And this is why with a lot of interviews, whatever way your subject is facing, they will place their eyes on the corresponding intersecting point on the rule of thirds. This will give them the perfect headroom and leading room. And of course, this doesn't have to be with interviews. Any shot or conversation that takes place, you want to give them headroom and looking room. And you would also want to do this when your subject is moving. You want to anticipate the movement without just reacting to it. If a subject moves, you want to move with them with the same amount of looking room as if you weren't moving. You wouldn't want to react late and it look like the subject is almost pushing the frame or forcing the movement. Leading room and headroom should always be used unless number 8 is actually one of my favorites, and it is to break the rules. And I know we just talked about how important it is to keep some of these rules, and I'm not saying to break them for no reason, but it is very cinematic to break the rules for a specific purpose. Now, each of these rules communicates something. So to break the rules will also communicate something else. So if you break the rule, make sure it is communicating what you intended it to communicate. The King's Speech is a perfect example. It's about a man who is soon to become king, but he has a stutter. This person, who should be the most powerful person in the film, he should be in the center of the frame and dominate every scene he's about to be king, is so scared to death when he meets his speech therapist. And this is because he's embarrassed by what he has. They purposefully film him with a crazy amount of headroom to show just how small and insignificant he feels. Then whenever they have a conversation, they give him no looking room at all to again give us the feeling of awkwardness. When he finally gains the courage, they give him looking room and they give him headroom to show that everything is back to normal. This rule was broken purposefully. One of my favorite films when it comes to composition is The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. Starting out, our main character is depressed and he's a loser, and at the beginning of the film, they almost frame him out of the shot, breaking the rule of thirds by placing him at the very bottom or at the very edge of the screen. But at the end of the film, our hero is placed in the center to show progression, is to show his character development, and the contrast of these two shots is crazy, and all of it communicates a message. So as you can see, composition isn't just one step or one simple thing you can do. It's a series of steps that bring the audience's attention to our main subject, because that is our goal, to show our audience exactly where we want them to look by having the most pleasing looking image and the most cinematic. But also, like we just showed you, sticking to the rules 100% can ruin creativity. And just like with all rules, they can be broken, but they must have a reason to be broken. If our subject was framed like this, but he had his life completely in order, it would feel distracting and unnecessary. So every single shot tells a story. Where you place your subject in the frame tells a story. Be purposeful with your composition, and by taking these 8 steps, you are guaranteed to boost the production value of your projects and achieve cinematic results. So I hope that this video has really helped you guys out. Again, if you'd like to learn every single aspect of filmmaking, be sure to check out our website at tomorrowsfilmmakers.com. We have over 1,000 training videos and over 100 hours of content on every single filmmaking subject that you can imagine. And if you want to go into the production side with weddings, real estate, music videos, commercials, we teach all about that. If you want to go more into the narrative side with directing, storyboarding, acting, we teach all of those as well. And like I said at the beginning, we have successfully been selling this course with an $800 price tag for years, but for a limited time we are offering it to you guys for only 97 bucks.
تمام، هذا هو الفيديو الثاني. إن شاء الله بعد البريك رح نشرحه على السريع، شو أخذنا فيه. هاخذ لنا بريك ونرجع. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. خلينا نرجع للدرس، نشرح الفيديوهات، نشوفه على السريع سوا مع بعض مرة تانية عشان نحن نلخصه، اللي ما فهم عشان يفهم معنا. طبعا خلينا نرجع أول شيء عند أول نقطة. هذا هو الفيديو اللي لكم انتبهوا عليه، لأنه هذا الفيديو مهم عندنا بالنسبة لنا. هون بيحكي عن الكاميرات اللي نحن
You
لازم
need to
نحن
buy some
نستخدمها.
expensive lights or a Ronin S or an expensive lens to get more cinematic images. All you have to do is watch this video and apply these steps to your filmmaking. Now, the first rule that all of you guys need to apply is the rule of thirds. Now, the rule of thirds is a very well-known technique in the filmmaking world that you might be familiar with, but you also might not be using it properly. In a nutshell, it is
هاي هي المربعات أو الخطوط الوهمية اللي نحن لازم ننتبه لها ونحن عم نصور، إنه يكون الشخص موجود في النص.
scientifically proven that our eyes are drawn to these four intersecting points of the frame, not the direct center, but these four corners. So by placing our subject on those four corners, it looks very much appealing and much more cinematic to the audience. Watch any Hollywood movie and you will notice that the main subjects are almost always on one of these intersecting points. Now, the center of the frame is always reserved for subjects with authority. If your subject is teaching or has more authority, you can put them in the center of the frame. That's why all master classes and other teaching videos, including one like this, are always placed in the middle. It just automatically gives your subject more authority in whatever he's talking about and makes it look like this is the main subject and I need to be listening to this person. Now, if you have a subject looking into the camera but off to one side, it doesn't feel quite as compelling
بالضبط، إذا أنت حاطط الكاميرا على شوي على اليمين أو شوي على اليسار ما راح يعطي جدية للفيديو تبعك.
as if they're in the center of the frame. But if your subject is not doing that, always put them on the rule of thirds. For landscapes or horizons, place them on one of the two lines going across and you will have an appealing image. The great thing is pretty much all cameras have a rule of thirds overlay built in, so you can have the rule of thirds on the back of your camera to get great composition with whatever camera you have. Something as simple
على فكرة حتى في التليفون أو في الهاتف في الموبايل يعني موجود هاي الخاصية، إنه يكون إنه هاي هي الجايدز، هاي اللي نحن شايفينها قدامنا، موجودة حتى في الهواتف تبعتنا.
as placing your subject on the rule of thirds can completely change your image. Number 2 is balance. Inside your frame, you can have one side more heavy than the other, and the audience can actually feel it. Like in interviews, if you have your subject to one side and also a picture frame on the same side as your subject, your image is going to start to feel unbalanced and very heavy to one side. And even if the audience doesn't know what feels wrong, they just know that something feels off. You can either move that picture frame to the other side or just add something to balance out the image, like a lamp. This looks much more balanced and much more cinematic. And when it comes to composition, I try to have something on the other side of my frame to balance out my subject at all times. And it doesn't have to be something huge, and it also doesn't need to be horizontal. It can also be balanced vertically or diagonally, whether it's a building, a statue, even a flower, something in the frame to balance the image, or your shot will start to look really heavy to one
لو لاحظين في إضاءة هذا الخلفية اللي حاطينها وراها جدا مهمة.
side. You can obviously apply this to interviews and talking head videos, but you can also apply this to weddings, real estate, and all other types of videos. It really doesn't matter, just make sure that you have balance in your frame. Number 3 is depth. You can create depth in many different ways, but one way is to shoot with a lower aperture. Not only will it make your image have more depth by blurring out the background, but it will also make it more cinematic and can also remove any distractions from your audience. This shot looks great, but you had no idea that there was something distracting in the background because we removed the distraction by shooting in a lower aperture. By blurring out the background, we create depth and separate our subject from the background. Another simple way to create depth is to simply pull your subject away from the background. It might seem simple, but I've seen many filmmakers film interviews up against a wall, giving your image absolutely no depth and it doesn't look cinematic. If I have to film an interview in a small room, I will inconvenience myself in order to have depth in my image. I'll push myself and the cameras as far in a corner as possible to bring my subject as far away from the background as possible. You can also add something interesting in the foreground to create depth, and by placing something in the foreground, we're able to not only show movement much easier, but it creates depth in our image and allows us to kind of shoot through it. It doesn't have to be or coming around from behind something as more of a reveal. We have our subject, the foreground, and these are simply natural lines in your composition that lead your audience to your subject. They can be found in everyday objects like hallways, landscapes, bridges, and they simply draw in your audience's attention to your subject. Now, they use leading lines in Hollywood all the time to bring attention to something. In USA's Mr. Robot, in this building, our subject always knows where he needs to go, and we as an audience know where he needs to go by the leading lines throughout the scene. But when our main character gets lost, what happens to those leading lines? They are gone. The character doesn't know where to go, and we as an audience don't know where he needs to go because there are no leading lines leading our eyes to the subject or the direction he should go. Something as simple as lines in the frame can lead our eyes towards a subject or away from the subject. So look for leading lines in your image to draw the attention of the audience. Some are very obvious, like staircases or a handrail, but some can be even more subtle, like the top of a picnic table. The tablecloth works great, but removing the tablecloth so we have those lines on the top pointing
بالضبط، لازم يكون في عندنا هيك نفس الخطوط أفضل. شوف كيف الفرق.
towards our subject really make a difference. Number 5 is symmetry. As humans, we love order and we love to see something symmetrical. It looks appealing to us and very cinematic. Now, symmetry also doesn't take much effort to get. Looking at a person one way might look fine, but you might be able to just move the camera slightly to frame the shot in a way that's more symmetrical. This shot not only looks very symmetrical because of the building, but even has leading lines straight to our subject. All of this was done by barely moving the camera. So look around and find symmetry. Frame your shot and compose it properly to get the most natural and most cinematic project you've ever made. Number 6 is a dominant subject. If I critique a student's video, one of the main problems I see most often is that there is no dominant subject. You want to use all of these steps we just talked about to draw your audience towards the subject. But if the audience doesn't even know what the subject is, then you've completely failed in what you were trying to do. And having a dominant subject doesn't mean that you can't do a wide-angle shot and have to be close up on their face. It just means that when an audience looks at an image, they need to know exactly where their eyes need to go. They need to know exactly what they're supposed to be looking at. First thing is to fill the frame. Way too often people have empty space that is unnecessary. Now, some people will say, oh, it's artistic. No, it's not. It's distracting. You can be artsy and not distracting. Having this as your main subject, but this is in your frame, this is not artsy. This is sloppy. And most of the time, it's just a simple mistake, and they don't fully fill the frame. So please, fill the frame and get rid of all unnecessary dead space. Number 2 is when you fill
لكن هون أعبي المساحات مو مهمة. يعني مثلا هون شو في مساحات مش مهمة. خلي التركيز كله على الشخص أو على السبجكت اللي أنت بدك إياه.
Fill the frame, fill it with things that aren't distracting. If we have lots of empty dead space, I would frame it so that you remove some of the dead space. But if you needed to actually fill that frame, if we add something really bright or with movement that's going to be distracting, our audience is going to be confused. We have a dominant subject by shooting at a lower aperture, using symmetry and leading lines to bring attention to our subject and removing all dead space in the frame. Number 7 is headroom or leading room. Have you ever heard the filmmaking phrase, hey, give them some breathing room? This is what they mean. First is headroom. This is the space from the top of the frame to the top of your subject's head. In an interview, you typically want to have your subject's eyes about 2/3 from the top of the frame, and this means that you want to have some room above their head. You don't want their head to be all the way at the top of the frame, and on the flip side, you don't want there to be tons of empty space above their head. Now, there isn't a hard and fast rule to this because all interviews are different, and I've had interviews with people with giant hair, and so you have to determine if you want to have all of the hair in the frame or cut off some of the hair, but it's best to keep their eyes on the top line in the rule of thirds. Now, leading room or looking room is the exact same thing, except it's with the direction your subject is looking. Whatever way they are looking, you want to give them looking room. And just like with headroom, having their eyes about 2/3 of the frame, you would want to give your subject about 2/3 of the frame to look into. The basic rule is you want more room in front of your subject than behind them. And this is why with a lot of interviews, whatever way your subject is facing, they will place their eyes on the corresponding intersecting point on the rule of thirds. This will give them the perfect headroom and leading room. And of course, this doesn't have to be with interviews. Any shot or conversation that takes place, you want to give them headroom and looking room. And you would also want to do this when your subject is moving. You want to anticipate the movement without just reacting to it. If a subject moves, you want to move with them with the same amount of looking room as if you weren't moving. You wouldn't want to react late and it look like the subject is almost pushing the frame or forcing the movement. Leading room and headroom should always be used unless number 8 is actually one of my favorites, and it is to break the rules. And I know we just talked about how important it is to keep some of these rules, and I'm not saying to break them for no reason, but it is very cinematic to break the rules for a specific purpose. Now, each of these rules communicates something. So to break the rules will also communicate something else. So if you break the rule, make sure it is communicating what you intended it to communicate. The King's Speech is a perfect example. It's about a man who is soon to become king, but he has a stutter. This person, who should be the most powerful person in the film, he should be in the center of the frame and dominate every scene he's about to be king, is so scared to death when he meets his speech therapist. And this is because he's embarrassed by what he has. They purposefully film him with a crazy amount of headroom to show just how small and insignificant he feels. Then whenever they have a conversation, they give him no looking room at all to, again, give us the feeling of awkwardness. When he finally gains the courage, they give him looking room and they give him headroom to show that everything is back to normal. This rule was broken purposefully. One of my favorite films when it comes to composition is The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. Starting out, our main character is depressed and he's a loser, and at the beginning of the film, they almost frame him out of the shot, breaking the rule of thirds by placing him at the very bottom or at the very edge of the screen. But at the end of the film, our hero is placed in the center to show progression, is to show his character development, and the contrast of these two shots is crazy, and all of it communicates a message. So as you can see, composition isn't just one step or one simple thing you can do. It's a series of steps that bring the audience's attention
هذا
to
هو
our
ملخص هو بحكي لنا آخر شيء الملخص للفيديو ما احنا شايفين. معنى هذا هو الفيديو، أهم فيديو. ممكن أرسل لكم إياه كمان على الجروب، إني أنسخ لكم الرابط وأبعث لكم إياه، لأنه هذا الفيديو جدا مهم عشان نراجعه يعني. هذا إذا أنتم حابين تصيروا يعني مصورين محترفين، ممكن نحن نشاهد فيديو كذا أو كذا عد كذا مرة علشان نفهمه أكثر. لسه أعتقد في عنا فيديو واحد أو فيديوهين كمان عشان نخلص النظري. إن شاء الله حنسويهم في المحاضرات القادمة. هذا حيكون درسنا اليوم، إن شاء الله تكونوا استفدتوا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.